Good afternoon, everyone. People are trickling in, but we will make a start. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Welcome to this webinar with the More Strategic Group and F&P. My name's Fiona Atkinson. I'm the Content Manager at F&P. I'd like to begin the session today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past and present here today. Some quick housekeeping. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A box on your screen to post your question. If you could use the Q&A box rather than the chat box, that just helps us keep an eye on the questions, which we'll get to later in the session. I also want to mention that you will receive a recording of this webinar and the slides in a few days' time. So don't worry about missing anything. You'll get the recording and the slides. So that's it for housekeeping. I will introduce you to our speaker for today's webinar, who is Karen Armstrong. So Karen is the Director of More Impact. She is part of the More Strategic Group and was previously Director of Marketing and Fundraising at Cancer Council Australia. She's also a founding board member of Include a Charity and is a former FIA conference chair. And today, Karen is going to talk to us about engaging the top 20% of your supporters to drive more fundraising. Karen, thank you so much for being here today, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona, for that intro. And I'm super excited to be here with F&P today because this is a topic that we have been working on with the team for about 5 years. So it is the kind of pulling together a lot of information that we've been working with incredible charities to be able to achieve this. So yes, how do we raise more? The never-ending kind of challenge and question on all of our lips. So we wanted to really understand what drives growth. And the big piece of, or I guess the big challenge that we were constantly hearing from charities was two key things. We would either hear from one team, let's say that's Jane. Jane is absolutely focused on acquisition, and it was always about we need to be building more people, more supporters, and that is really Jane's focus. But Jane would get a little bit frustrated because she's like, we are hitting our sign-up targets, we're getting lots of volume through, but it feels like we are filling a leaky bucket. So I just don't want to do any more acquisition. I don't want to waste any more money until the retention side of the business is sorted out. On the flip side, we have Mark. Mark is all focused on retention, and Mark is really feeling frustrated with Jane because Mark feels like we are getting terrible quality supporters. We need to focus on recruiting the right kind of supporters, and then we will be able to make sure that we are actually converting and retaining those people. Or it might be that Mark would say, Jane, you're not giving us enough people. We've actually now gone to everybody we possibly can, and we really need to bring in more people because we're running out of people to send to telemarketing, to do conversions, etc. And so we just saw this like constant tension point over acquisition of supporters, retention of supporters, and organisations would always say to me, oh, we're too focused over here, or we're too focused over here. But no one was really getting that right blend of acquisition and retention. And so we wanted to understand really who was right, like what is it that's actually going to make the difference to growth? And this was about 8 years ago. I was introduced to the Ehrenberg Institute, which is actually the largest marketing science organisation in the world, and it is based in Adelaide. So unknown fact, we are actually sitting on basically a hotbed of marketing science, which is led by Byron Sharp. And so he published a book called How Brands Grow. And when this was first mentioned to me, I actually found it a little bit confrontational because I was at IFC and someone said to me, there's no such thing as brand loyalty. And I was taken aback by that. I was like, okay. So it was really like, you need to go and read these books and you need to see what actually drives growth. I'd kind of been raised on the era of Kotler, understanding about retention, how we look after supporters, etc. So I'd been really kind of understood that for me, I was really thinking about what is that loyalty, what is our frequency, etc. And so Byron really has taken this quite kind of, I guess, a confrontational stance 10 years ago into whether or not it is a quality piece that we need to focus on, or is it a quantity piece that we need to focus on. Now, all Byron's work is with commercial brands, so it's with all your big FMCG organisations like your Kellogg's, etc. But I wanted to see, does their data science hold up for the not-for-profit sector? They have about 10 key laws, but I wanted to kind of deep dive into 4 of them. So the first one was the law of a natural monopoly. And that basically says bigger brands means that you attract more people. And I knew this kind of inherently to be true because I had the advantage of working for Cancer Council for more than 10 years. And I knew we had a little bit of a edge on the market. I knew it was easier to raise money as a result of that brand presence. And that is really that bigger brands by default attract more light buyers. So through our generosity tracker, we have been tracking brand awareness for many charities across the last 3 years. And I was able to take that data and say, of the people who are aware of a charity, how many are actually occasional donors to these charities? And essentially what we found is 83% of brand awareness explains our light buyer ratios. So essentially it is true. Essentially what you need to be focused on is, Jane is absolutely right, we need to be focusing on awareness at the top level, and that will basically bring in your light buyers. So when I say light buyers, it's basically thinking about how many charities are they donating to and how much are they able to donate. So we're looking at both of those parameters, but essentially it's the way that they think about themselves as how frequently they will give to that charity, essentially. The second one was that there is a duplication of purchase law. So again, they were really looking at it from whether or not you buy detergents in the market. And they were saying someone buys, you look at your market share, and even though you've got that market share, it doesn't mean that many people are buying from you. It just means in this point of this year, of the people that could buy from brand 1, 2, or 3, they happen to be purchasing from you this year. So what they were saying is actually customers are not very loyal. And actually, even if they're a heavy buyer from you at some point in time, they might come in or out. So this was saying that it's a pretty competitive market and you shouldn't really be focusing on loyalty. So this was really the one that was a little bit challenging, so to speak, when I first heard this. What we did find is that is true. We do know from the charitable sector is that a lot of people are engaged with a lot of charities. We even see that in our most committed area of confirmed bequesters, where we can be seeing anywhere of 5 or 6 charities named. So we do know that 70% of people are giving to more than one charity. So yes, that is true. Super competitive market, and they will be certainly giving to other organisations. The next challenge was to think about the Pareto law principle. And I've just got a little bit of background noise. I'm just wondering if people can mute. If anyone's unmuted, if they can mute would be great. I don't know if that's possible. Okay, so the Pareto law principle. So most of us will have heard of this before. So that is saying that 20% of your donors are donating 80% of your revenue. Now, this was the next law that they found, and they said, actually, yes, it's true there is a slightly higher ratio in that 20% of your customers drive around about 50% of your sales, but it's definitely not an 80-20 law. So they were first of all saying, well, this isn't true. So growth really comes from the many, not the few. Now, actually, I found this to be reasonably close to what we saw in the charity market. So 12-month value, 20% of our supporters are delivering 62% of our income. So it's actually pretty close. So they were kind of just over 50%, we're just over 60%. So actually, when I look at active supporters, we had a base of about 1 million. We were able to see that about 62% of revenue comes from the top 20% of supporters. But there is that important factor, which is quite different for charities, which we even know from Fee talking about at the benchmarking project, a huge amount of our income each year, 36% I think it is coming from those people who've given 10 years or more. So when we overlay that point of saying, well, what about lifetime value? Then actually this is where it really becomes very apparent that the Pareto law is absolutely true. So 20% of our supporters is driving almost 90% of lifetime value. So therefore, unlike the commercial sector, we really have to be thinking about the loyalty of our supporters and how we are looking after them. So this is when Mark really gets to win the game here, because actually lifetime value is incredibly important, and it's important that we have that retention. And then this was the one that I was mentioning, is that there was their law of buyer moderation, which means that heavy buyers don't always stay heavy. So sometimes you can have, even if you've got somebody into the organisation and you've got great support from them, some of them will be giving a small amount, then they'll give a big amount, then they'll flip back to giving a small amount, and then moving around. This is not what we found in the data. So actually what we found is we looked at who was in the top 20%, and what we wanted to find out is, are they still giving in the top 20%? So not even just are they still giving, it was, are we keeping them as heavy buyers effectively 5 years later? And we found that 55% of them were. So the way we did this is we looked at who was in the top 20 back in financial year 1920. We had about 1 million supporters from 16 different charities. 2 years later, 63% was still in our top 20%. And then 5 years later, it was at 55%. And actually, when I look at were they giving in every single year, then actually half of them consistently performed in the top 20% every year during that 5-year period. So really, it's super important to be understanding who are those sticky supporters that are going to drive that long-term revenue. So with this, we have concluded that Mark and Jane are both right. That does mean your job is exceptionally hard, because we can't do either just acquisition or retention. We have to get the right balance. So as Mark Ritson says, who is probably loves to have a good debate on marketing methods, his conclusion is bothism is really the cure for marketers. So whether we are debating targeted niche marketing or mass marketing, digital or traditional, acquisition or retention, we pretty much need to always make sure we've got a blend of all of these things happening in our marketing strategies. So with that, we wanted to work out, how do we apply this to the charity sector? And so we built out the Raise More method. So Raise has 2 components to it. Essentially, we've got the method in the way that you need to think about it, and then we also have the platform so that you can actually get the right data into your hands so you can make the right decisions on that basis. So let me talk to you about what RAISE stands for. So first of all, RAISE stands for the fact that you need to have robust data and systems. And this is probably the one, every time we do a supporter experience project, this is probably the one that people will say to me, we can't do this now because we don't have the right tech stack, we're not in the right situation. We really need to focus on getting clean data. So this is all about saying, how do we have the foundations to make sure we create our gold data set? We need a gold standard data set, everybody does. And especially as AI is coming into the market, this is the main thing that I keep hearing from everybody. If you want AI to work, you need to have great data. So it needs to be clean and it needs to be in a great situation. Then we're really focusing then on AINS at this point in time. So we have, first of all, we need to activate that mass engagement. So if the quantity driver still becomes true, basically we all need to be prepared for constantly bringing in decent volumes of supporters so that we can actually be making sure we're maximizing that market penetration. So you need to be really focused on making sure that you're growing your supporter bathtub by bringing in enough new supporters every year. So it's really important that you track that. Secondly, if that is the case, then therefore we need to start working out, we can't rely on just everybody that's coming in being great quality supporters. And so therefore, from a market perspective, we need to say, how do we find the right people to support you longer term? And we also don't want to spend money on the wrong people. So we really need to make sure we're focusing on the right people. And from that, to really drive this lifetime value, then we need to be building these longer term relationships. And so we say this is the S stage, which is all about supercharge those fanatics, the people who absolutely love you. We know that that is the top 20% who's ultimately going to drive 90% of your lifetime value. And none of this is possible unless we empower your teams and we empower your leadership. So that's the other thing that's been quite challenging, I think, is I think we've all known we needed to have a supporter-centered approach. We needed to collaborate across teams, but we're all still sitting in product-driven profitability silos, or we're sitting in acquisition retention teams, but getting that across view has been incredibly difficult. So this is all about saying, how do we actually work collaboratively as a team to give that best supporter experience? So the way we did that is we said, all right, we now understand that the Pareto principle definitely holds for longer term lifetime value. So yes, if we want to have a slightly longer view of how we collaborate and know that it's not just necessarily going to be the next 12 months that we see these results, then we need to be thinking across the whole supporter base about these 6 groups, essentially. So our first group is the attention group. So that is, we see lots of these leads come in, whether it's 2-step leads, advocate leads, etc. So they've come in, we've managed to move them from, we've got a go stage, which means they're out there floating and aware of your brand. But this is when they first share that data with you. So you've got their attention, but they haven't made their first gift. The spark stage is they've made that first gift, and that has come through in the last 2 years. We also have a little breakdown here, which is a respark group, which is those people who have been sitting on your reignite audience for a really long time, which is they've been sitting on your database, actually doing not very much, but we're able to respark them. And then we have 3 groups in our active supporters. We have our sustainers, and that is the people who actually, we may not be able to grow value with them. They may not actually want all your communications, and they may have actually kind of given and handed over responsibility for you to look after these people. I think of these people a little bit like our regular givers, that we know we don't really want to bug them because they're just going to keep on giving because it's become habitual. The 2 groups we're most interested in is the cultivate group. So who can we focus on to help drive more value? And our fanatics group, because we know we need to build the size and the volume of this fanatics group progressively over time. One of the things when we were looking at the principles of the relativity in terms of what happens from brand awareness through to those heavy buyers, basically we've still found that there is a relationship all the way through this funnel, that essentially 63% of our deep fanatic base is still driven by that top level brand awareness. But definitely once you start moving them into the organization, the correlation is not as strong as it was for that light buyer market. So once we get into the fanatics, we can really work with these supporters and steward them through the cultivate and into that fanatic stage. But I thought that I'd really focus on the fanatics because this is the area that I am most passionate about. And I am not the first to say we need the death of the donut pyramid, but this is where it becomes absolutely transparent, is that model is not helping us, because actually when you look across the organisation and you look at where value is basically being driven, we use, to identify fanatics, we use a combination of lifetime value and 12-month value, and then we can look at the whole database to classify people, and that means you've got also a way of kind of basically benchmarking your fanatics, so you can see how many have you got and how well are they performing. And we found that while there's a little bit of variation in the percentages, they are definitely spread across the full base of all your product areas. So in our confirmed bequesters, that is still our highest percentage. So 34% of our confirmed bequesters are in the fanatics group. And majors, again, they don't always stay in here because you've got lapsed majors and things like that. So they don't always stay in these groups, because everyone said to me, oh, is it just that we need to stay focused on our major donors and that's where all this revenue is coming in from? No, is the answer. It varies a little bit. So all the way down to regular givers, because I guess regular givers, it's a bit more of a, let's call it a flatter price variation in a way, because you're bringing everyone in on a bit more of a standardized monthly donation amount. So you've got a little bit lower percentage, but still it's the lowest at 16%, and your majors are sitting at 33%. And you've got a spectrum all the way down. So into mids, you've got 25%. Cash is a little bit more unclear, because some charities have flagged cash as they've given anything, and some have flagged it via individual giving. So it's probably somewhere between that RG/cash rate. And then our pipeline supporters are also in there. So this is really important. And this is why looking after the fanatics and really understanding those supporters is the responsibility of the whole organisation to focus on that. Now that creates a challenge, unfortunately, because to achieve that, you need the right tech, you do need the right people, and you need to make sure that your data is in a place that you're all confident in. So we talk about data in terms of 4 different areas. So we think about operational data, and most of you have been using recency, frequency, and value as the key driver of data selections, etc. But that's going to let us down if we just keep looking at the behaviours that we're seeing in the database, and especially when we're trying to understand the differences in what's a light buyer and what's a heavy buyer. So we need to append in and really think about these other data points. So the next one is how are they engaging with us? And we have evidence around all of these. So if you want to know correlations with anything, we can show you how it correlates with gifts and wills supporters, etc. And I will show you a little bit of that later. Secondly, we need to understand their motivations. And so, yes, there are some things that we can do on a mass level, but to really understand what motivates people, you need to be really watching what they're reading, what content they're involved in, or what they're actually directly telling us. So we append in our survey data from this perspective. And then the last thing that we can look at is Z data, which is everything that we can bring in and append, which actually very simply is based on postcode data. So we're lucky that the ATO and census data is able to give us really important information around socioeconomic capacity so that we can bring that in to be able to start getting a profile on our supporters straight away. Now the tech stack, this is the challenge. So the tech stack at the moment looks broadly like this. We have a CRM. We also generally have a marketing automation platform, and that might be sending out some emails, but we might also have our own SMS platform in addition to that. We've also got what's happening on our website. We've got happening on social media. Hopefully we get some of that into the CRMs, but what we're discovering is that is not necessarily the case. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to start creating these rich supporter profiles. So you need to start connecting this engagement data. Then, as I mentioned, we pull in survey data. So we really want to understand the motivations, and net promoter score is incredibly important. So we'll talk about net promoter score, commitment scores, loyalty scores, etc. If we're lucky, we have a nice API that can connect these platforms, but I think everybody knows this is the bane of our lives. Then your IT teams will need to transform that data and make it usable and give you great insights. Not to mention that you might now also have a CDP, so we've got those floating around. We also have the lovely little bugbear of ours, which is all the community fundraising platforms sitting elsewhere, and we're hoping that's coming into our CRM data, or it might go into the data warehouse. Bring all of that data together, and then you might get some dashboards built. But basically, all of this is required, and it's a huge job, but we don't want that to be overwhelming, because basically what we've said is we've worked out, we know how to bring all these data points in together now so that we can get you out to that bottom level of the dashboards fairly cleanly and fairly quickly, so that you actually don't necessarily need to try and work out how do you navigate the tech stack in your organization, because that is an overwhelming challenge. So this is why getting supporter experience, really nailing it in the organization has been difficult. Second reason is that we have basically a lot of teams that are involved in making this happen. So first of all, we've got back of house people. So we'll have people like all of our data folk, etc. To get the data right and be able to work out how we could use that for supporter experience, we needed this 6 roles, and that doesn't even include all the people looking after your CRM, etc. But we needed a data scientist, we needed a UI expert, we needed a data engineer, we needed a dashboard developers. I think we had about 3. We needed a data architect as well. So it's not easy to bring all these insights to be able to make them usable for you. And most frequently, our fundraising teams are sitting in the middle, and you're all about then how do you get the data, make sure you got the right insights, and then how do you start designing and developing the journeys. And to do that, we're working in-house with teams, but you'll need marketing automation experts, and that's a real shortage. You'll need copywriters, you'll need graphic designers, you quite often need to talk to the marketing team. So you're actually needing to coordinate quite a lot of stakeholders in-house as well. And thirdly, you then need to work out who's your, I call it kind of salespeople, but who is that front of house group who are actually going to be designing and delivering that supporter experience to make it really fantastic. And then you can have a combination of relationship managers, you can have outsourced telemarketing, you can have in-house supporter care. They're quite often bogged down in all the administration they have to do. You've got fundraisers out there, you've got community engagement teams. So it's really about making sure that you get that front of house experience. And if I had to, I would say that is the most important team, to make sure we've empowered them to be able to make that supporter experience really fantastic, to be able to really drive revenue for you. So knowing that was so difficult, this is why we built out our platforms essentially. So now we have basically two platforms, Supporter Value and Supporter View. So this is going to give you all the insights you need to make sure that your back of house component is successful. Secondly, Megan has been doing a beautiful job of building out a toolkit. So this is our Raise toolkit, and it's all about what are all those things that you need for that briefing process. How do you map the journeys? We also talk about how do you map the experience, because it doesn't have to be all about the automation process. It doesn't need to be linear. It's what is a really great, memorable experience you can create. And to make life easier, because I'm deeply passionate about AI, it's how do we create AI personas so we can start creating those personalization pieces. And this is not to put your copywriters out of business in any way, shape or form, but you get great copy, you use that, and then you work out how you can vary it to your different audiences with your AI personas. And thirdly, we have created a tool that means we can empower your front of house to deliver a great experience. So it will be going through everything from what's the right data to collect, all the way through to celebrating people who have been here for 10 years. So we can make sure we deliver an A1 supporter experience and that we're giving the right people the right ask using supporter prediction. So you can ask me lots of more questions about that when we get to the Q&A, but very briefly to say that that is the more strategic supporter suite. And we also do have a Gifts and Wills suite, because I know there'll be a few of you that are here for Gifts and Wills today. So we do have your own special deep dive. Next year, we'll be releasing the regular giving one, although you can do quite a lot with the way we've set up the supporter suite for regular giving. So if that is of interest, you can still start with the supporter suite. And we also have a profitability suite, because in a second, you'll see why profitability is so important. So let's move on to this next topic area. Let's identify and then supercharge our fanatics. So from what you can see in the way we spoke about, acquisition is important all the way through to identify our fanatics. We have to go through these stages of going, how do we identify them? How do we nurture them? And how do we celebrate our fanatics? And I'm going to give you a little bit of a use case. And these are absolutely real use cases. I will not declare what the charities are. But here is an example of Ben. Well, that might be a disguised name. This is indeed my son. Made a donation because he had some extra pocket money, made a donation of $10 to a charity. And because he would have been picked up in the recency of giving, he has received, got a receipt, 28 emails. And this was after about 18 months, I think it was. 4 appeal asks, 13 SMS messages, including 5 that were conversational about gifts in wills, 6 call attempts for a regular giving upgrade, and a free gift in will offer. And it has continued. So if you think about Ben in this situation, Ben gave $10. When I look at all the activities that happened, I estimate that's probably cost the charity $45 roughly, which means we're making a loss of $35. So while Ben did something very generous, Ben at an individual level has not been the most profitable supporter for that charity. Second use case, different charity. This was Sarah. So Sarah gave $700 online. And in the follow-on period of that, Sarah received 61 emails. That's it. So for Sarah, absolutely brilliant. Gave $700. The charity probably has only spent about $9 on those emails. Therefore, the net income is $690. And so you'd say, okay, that's great. Sarah's super profitable. But the problem is we didn't weigh up what is that lost lifetime value that could have been driven through people actually getting the right engagement for Sarah in this case. And so actually the lost opportunity is that actually we know people who look like Sarah are worth $4,250 to the organisation. So actually when you look at it, the opportunity cost, it was very, very high. So that has not worked out either. And I use these case studies because it's an example of you can't be just throw everything at them and you can't be just keep them in the one channel. You've got to work through what the signals are for these supporters and then work out how to actually get the right ask and the right engagement for these different audiences. So I'll just show you one example. This is using real data. I thought I'll just have a look at all of our supporters. So we've got about 23 million records on the database at the moment so that we can have a look at this. And I thought I'll look at everybody who's got a first gift date from 2015 through to 2020. And then I'll put some estimated costs. And again, you can enter into the tool, you can put your costs so you can work out what you think your profitability ratio looks like. But I went with, okay, 5 years ago, we're probably paying about $350 for a regular giver. I've put down cash supporters as basically costing around about $12 a year. And I've put our fundraiser costs in at around about $45 to acquire them. And so when I watch this and then I see what actually happens, we basically look at a flowchart that says, on the basis of these costs, this is what they came in. This is what we know their lifetime value is. This is what they've cost us. So we can break it into these people are profitable and these people are not. And the first thing I would say is, I know you all look at that for your business cases, but do you actually track your supporters to see that that is actually happening in reality? Because when we look at that, just based on those quick assumptions, we basically find that 43% of our cash supporters have been profitable, 45% of our regular giver supporters have been profitable. Now, this is where it's interesting. If they are cash and regular giving, 65% of them are profitable. So really good signal to go, that's important. And our fundraisers, 53% of them are profitable. So actually, I think quite often, fundraisers, we kind of get pushed to the side, but actually quite a lot of them are profitable in the way that you look at that, what you spend on them and what you basically return. What's very interesting is when you overlay their lifetime value. And then what you can see is basically we'll look at what is their net income for each of these audiences. And again, we've always been going, okay, regular giving is absolutely the only way you can go. But what you can actually see here is that cash over that period of time of those supporters who have been acquired, assuming that's the right cost base, they have been as profitable as our regular givers. And you also saw that there wasn't very much difference in terms of the percentage of conversion. So we've really got to be much more creative in the way we think about the way people give. And I think we've held ourselves back a little bit with regular givers and how do you upgrade those costs? And I know that's kind of that challenge of how do you keep moving up that value. What you can see here is obviously those people who are multi-product are twice as profitable. So not only are they better in terms of becoming profitable, they're also worth much more in terms of net income. So again, a really clear reason why you actually need to work across the teams. And then this is the sad thing about our poor fundraisers is because we're not working out how to move them into growing that lifetime value, their actual lifetime value is very low in this scenario. So they're profitable, but we're not getting big returns on them. So we've really got to be thinking about how do we make that work. So these are the signals you need to be looking for to identify your fanatics. So first up, interestingly, tenure. So you need to be identifying your fanatics really quickly. So actually it's 4 times more likely that they were acquired in the last 24 months. So this idea of ring fencing by product does not make sense because that is your opportunity in that first 2 years is to identify those people are likely to be fanatics. You need to get those signals right and you need to work out how you're building your supporter profiles. Second thing is that they're most likely to be in the 55 to 75 age bracket. So they're 2 to 3 times more likely to become a fanatic if they're in that age bracket versus our 45 to 54, sorry, or our 75 plus. So this is our kind of little golden age bracket. They're also twice as likely to be in a high socioeconomic area. And we really are focusing on how do we just get a really quick glimmer of insight based on their likely capacity to be able to give based on their postcode. And the final one is email engagement. And this is why you need to have in your tech stack your email communications linking through into your CRM, because at an individual level, you need to be able to see who is opening emails, and clicking emails is an even better indicator. So basically 3 times more likely to be opening your emails. And everyone's going to ask me, but we can't trust the opening emails. Yes, that is true, but there's ways you can get around it by looking at those people who've got 100% open rates versus those who have got some percentage of open rates. So there's definitely ways you can use opening emails as an indicator of success. So I'm just going to give you a very quick practical example. This is from Guide Dogs. So we've been working with them a long time on how to drive value and how to embed this in their organisation. But one of the tests we did was that they have Guide Dog Tails that runs 4 times across the year, and they're also running 3 appeals at the time. And they wanted to say, that feels like a lot, and actually it's really a lot on the team to make this happen. Could we drop one of those Guide Dog Tails and the Spring Appeal and see if we generate the same amount of revenue? So they did a test to see what happened, and I was able to analyse this looking at our different, or basically that Fanatics, Cultivate, Sustain and Spark group. And this is really interesting in the way that this works. So I guess the premise is, or the hypothesis was, if we send them just Guide Dogs Tails rather than Appeal, those people who love us will still give to us because they get the lovely Guide Dogs Tails to read and they will respond. And actually what we did find is that actually our Fanatics and Cultivates and Sustains group all absolutely held up, and we did not lose any volume or value compared to the previous year. Where we noticed the difference was actually in our Spark group. So if you think about the Spark group, those are the people who've only just given once, and we're still trying to really engage them and keep them on board. And so the loss was actually that Spark group. So you've really got to be thinking about what is the right experience for those people who've been with us 5 and 10 and 15 years, because they can have quite a different ask compared to those people who are new to the organisation. And that's when you really got to be working through that funnel to say, who are our fanatics and how do we look after them? So incredibly important to get that mix right. And I think when we're seeing this kind of wear out factor, especially of some of our older audiences, in terms of how many times they get asked and how many times they have to say no, and you do definitely see that we're getting that wear out piece happening. And if you go back, and we can talk about that with the generosity tracker, but you can absolutely track that through in terms of feedback, and it is starting to impact the trust levels that supporters have with us in those higher categories. Interestingly, actually, our younger audiences still love us. Our older ones are the ones that are feeling it. So we need to protect these Fanatics, Cultivates and Sustains. So you need a different way. We shouldn't be using appeals that work for our very early first gift arrive. We shouldn't be using the same strategies for them as we are for using people who have been with us 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So really be thinking about getting that experience right. And this is the last call for why it's so important for all of us to be working together. And that is because ultimately we need to be thinking about, at the end of the day, we would love everyone to become a Gifts and Wills supporter. But the Gifts and Wills teams are really struggling at the moment. So here's our Gifts and Wills specialist, Kate. And she's saying, I actually just don't know where to focus our efforts, and I don't know if I'm making a difference. And so we worked this out about 4 years ago, is that we just did not know what was happening with the pipeline and the relationship management, and how do we actually handle these huge volumes. So of I think I have 17 charities in this benchmark, we've got about 6,500 on average. They're looking after about 6,500 considerers. they're looking after about 1,000 intenders, and they're looking after about 2,000 confirmed bequesters. So we are basically looking at very high value supporters, but impossible to manage like a major donor team on a one-to-one basis. And so we needed to work out, how do you actually identify what activities you're doing, what should you focus on, and are we getting movement through that pipeline? So that's what we wanted to set out and achieve. And so we've started being able to track that every 6 months. But what I wanted to talk about today is really this gold data set that I mentioned at the start, which is we need to be building up these rich profiles of our supporters progressively over time. So the first one, which I always think is the simplest, is if you are doing any digital acquisition, anything like that, yes, you need to grab email and mobile. Then you need to start getting address. But even if you can get postcode at that point, definitely try and pick up postcode. It's a bit like when you go into a store and they ask what postcode you live in. It's super helpful information. It actually does help us to get a really early indicator of what leads to keep working with. So even if you think about, some charities have, 1 million leads, 100,000 leads, etc. But if you just had postcode, you would actually know where to start focusing your efforts on to try and convert those supporters. Second thing, you can start looking at their digital engagement, and this is more than just email, to be honest. We generally default to email because that seems to be the one we're all focused on, but you definitely need to be looking at SMS if you can track it, web visits. So quite often that can come back into either your marketing automation, your CDP, etc. We obviously are looking at their giving behaviours, so that's really important. And then if you can, we really would love, and this is probably easier for like regular giving signups and those types of product areas. But where we can is really think about gender. We can use title as another default to estimate what their gender is and what their age is, because more and more what we're looking at is, how do you understand both what product somebody is likely to engage in, but secondly, what generation are they? Because we know we need to send testimonials of people that look and feel the same as they do. So we need to make sure we're collecting that information to get the right storytelling happening with these supporters. Once you're moving into the gifts and wills space, then actually it's hugely beneficial to make sure we're collecting deeper profiles, such as what's their motivation, what's their family composition. So really important for us to know if they've got children, grandchildren, etc. And also we're looking for deeper engagement at this stage. So we're really looking for things like, are you attending events? Have you responded to calls, etc.? So we really need to be building this progressively over time. So if you think about this from any team or any activities that you're doing across the team, all of the activities that you do from individual giving, regular giving, mid-donors, etc., is building up these profiles progressively to help the gifts and wills team really make sure they know who they can steward. And that is because we've run correlations with basically these 6 key points. One, we know this commercially as well, the more channels they've given you in terms of contact points, the more they are worth, both in income and also likelihood of being gifts and wills supporters. For gifts and wills, age is incredibly important, but to be honest, it's still important even for you looking after your donors, and you saw that fanatics group of 55 to 74 being incredibly important. Thirdly, the engagement correlations. Fourthly, yes, giving still counts. So 12-month donations, but also lifetime value and tenure. We have seen some gifts and wills supporters come from very, very, very deeply lapsed. So please don't just be focusing on those people who are giving. Currently, we look at the capacity to give, and I'll expand a little bit on that. And then, are they doing multi-product engagement? So this is how you can start to identify who to focus on. This is the socioeconomic piece that I've mentioned a couple of times, and I just didn't want to miss this point. But essentially, all of you have access to be able to get the IRSD, which is basically bottom 10% all the way to the top 10% based on socioeconomic factors such as access to jobs, education, etc. Once you apply this into your database, you'll be able to see that there's a correlation of those who are in the top decile group are worth 2.5 times more at a lifetime value perspective. So that's the first thing. We did see though that there were obvious gaps, like certain postcodes weren't getting picked up, like 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, etc. were not getting picked up because they're in CBD, so they've got different socioeconomic indicators. And so we've been trying to improve this score, essentially to create a capacity to give score. And so this is quite a lot more effective now. So it essentially takes the Z data points, and it also takes lifetime value data points and 12-month giving data points, brings all of that together to help us identify where we should be focusing on, with the kind of goal is that you can have then a map of your market penetration. So if you're thinking about that acquisition mindset, you can be going, okay, I do want to try and do the best job I can for Mark. So Jane's working on that, but Jane can look at, well, what is my market penetration of high capacity and very high capacity give areas? And secondly, it can also help your Gifts and Wills team, because then you can go, I can see where all my supporters are, therefore I'm going to have an event at that point. An event's a great way, rather than doing one-on-one, I'm going to hold an event there, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So we've really been focusing on how do we help to really kind of focus down onto our best conversion opportunities. And we give you really simple tools to work out what is the area that I need to focus on. So how does the composition of my pipeline look? Do I have their contact details? How long have they been here? When they last revalidated? And that basically creates a quality score. So you as a team, from a Gifts and Wills team, can keep focusing on that quality score to make sure that you're getting as much information with good, rich supporter profiles. And then you can be using that to inform where you spend your time and where you spend your effort. So we wanted to make that as easy as possible. We know that has been incredibly hard. And one of the things that seems to be constantly causing teams angst is, how do we celebrate our supporters and how do we make sure we're thanking them? So in the tool, we've put a nice little export so you can just know who has just celebrated 5 years of giving, who has celebrated 10 years of giving, and you can just export that so you know straight up who to send a note to. We've got who do you need to send a birthday card to, how do you make sure you get a thank you call through to them. So really simple ways of just exporting and making sure we're celebrating that lifetime of giving. So hopefully you've had a few aha moments, but just to recap, I know there's always a lot of information in our webinars, but just to recap. So number one, building those audience insights is critical for the whole team, and you need to collaborate on those, and you really need to be focusing on building your golden data set over time. Secondly, you do need to focus on acquisition, and light buyers or light donors, don't think of them as a problem. They're not a problem. They're just what we actually have to work through where the gold is. And actually, this is kind of another kind of common question from the Gifts and Wills team, is they're like, I don't want all my pipeline, they're too hard. The reality is you have to have the light ones in order to actually move them through into confirmed bequesters. And we see that even though it's slow percentages moving through our pipeline, it still makes up quite a decent composition of our confirmed bequesters. So we have to work through this, and we have to know the signals to be able to work through those light donors, and we can't treat them all the same. Otherwise we end up with what we had with Ben being basically a total lost cause in terms of profitability. Thirdly, we need to focus on growth. That does require segmentation. It needs you to be really clear about the different areas of focus. And what I would say is that we're really thinking about being able to create clear delineation of data points. So we now look at it based on product, we look at it based on engagement stages, and we look at it based on generation, so that we can constantly be thinking about what is the right piece of the communication to get right for each of those different factors. And so then you can slice and dice your data however you need to, but you need to understand those data points. You need to really be building up good quality of data insights. Fourthly, I hope I have absolutely convinced you that as a team, you need to be focused on fanatics, and you need to be able to start identifying them with all those signals we talked about. They might start small, but they are what's going to drive your lifetime value in the end. And if you lose them and you don't convert them in those first 2 years, you're missing out on a really great opportunity. So you need to be able to nail your fanatics. And finally, let's make sure we keep a profitability lens on all of this, because ultimately what you actually want to do is be modeling success based on those supporters that are profitable, not everybody you'd be bringing into the regular giving pipeline or everybody that you're bringing into cash, because actually what you want is profitability to drive success. So you really want to be focusing on how you actually build more of the right audiences for your organization. So thank you to every charity that we have been working with. And with that, I am going to open up to questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was fantastic, full of brilliant takeaways and recommendations in there. We have got quite a few questions, which we'll try and get through now. Diana Morrison, we might come back to yours if there's time at the end, because I think you put this question in early and it actually got answered. You wanted to know what the criteria was for defining a fanatic, which I think we then went on and covered. So we'll come back to that if we have time for a recap. Diana Gibson asks, what
CDP.
CDP?
Yeah, so
CDP.
this is like a new, it's a little bit new, but it's really looking at how do we connect. It's basically the right time, right message, right people type piece of tech. So it's basically trying to connect into your social media, into your website visits, into your email. So it's trying to kind of create that engagement linkage, and it's also then helping to go back and retarget to those audiences. So it's quite a nice bit of tech, but you can go and have a look on, I think I put Segment or something in there. So go and have a look at some of those.
Great, thank you. A question from Maisa Lopez Gomez, who asked, I'm curious to know if you've been using generative AI to make sense of survey data.
Yes, Mesa, I think you know the answer to this. Absolutely. I actually got a little bit excited the other day because Jakob, who's our data scientist, managed to plug into our product to have an AI chatbot basically sitting behind our Net Promoter questions so that we can actually interpret all that open text data really quickly and easily, and it for also to be comparable across organizations. So we have our first AI LLM plugged into the product now, which is super exciting.
Very cool. Lee refers to the case study of Ben and asks if Ben provided his age.
Did Ben provide his age? Probably not, but it's a good question to then be going, well, as a charity, should we be thinking about that? In this case, it was a children's charity. So they really should have been thinking about it to make sure that we actually go, what is a relevant data point and is that important for you to collect? Because it really did show that the experience was massively misaligned in that delivery.
Yeah. Olivia asks, how do you calculate the costs of RG, cash, fundraiser, etc.? What is included in those cost calculations?
So Olivia, basically they were just estimates. They were just me doing back of the envelope. So essentially the way we'd be doing it with you as an organisation, we'd be saying, what are the costs that you've spent? So far, I've only found one organisation who seems to be methodically putting it into their database. So most of the time we just need to be looking at what were the acquisition codes, what were the cost of that campaign, and then we can put those in. So actually we can do profitability on quite a different few frameworks, which is why we're going to have this profitability suite, because we can look at acquisition codes, we can look at the product types. There's a whole range of ways to tackle it. So basically we try and come up with what's your hypothesis, what do you need to understand, and then we put those costs in, doing the best we can to basically back engineer if we can't immediately find it.
Absolutely. Marnie asks, is there benefit or value in paying for a wealth scan?
So I'm not an expert in wealth scan, and one of the things about our platform is that it is de-identified data. So we have done that deliberately to make it really safe for charities. But from everything I've heard, WealthScan is a great tool, especially if you want to be building up those profiles, etc. But it's definitely not my area of expertise. We're really focused on that mass piece of how do you understand where the big volume comes from, and then how do you actually make that manageable and really find who those fanatics are.
Right. Sorry, the Q&A box has just disappeared off my screen. Here we go.
Oh, that's right.
James Boyd, considering this theory and focus, what would your advice be to small charities raising more like 100,000 per annum?
James, I'm really sorry, but it is that hard truth, which bigger charities are benefiting from that monopoly piece, basically. So again, I think it's about working out like where is your warmer audiences, what can you actually control and build up in those audiences, whether it's a certain location within the country, whether it's a state-based thing, whether it's national. And again, it just is the reality that's hard slog. So I'm sorry, but small charities, you just do have a tougher job. So it's just what you can do to keep really driving that through. Again, I think it's looking at who are the supporters you have, how do you make sure they're more profitable, and then how can you keep investing in building that. The only other thing I think that would be important that we didn't touch on today is the fanatics. So we basically do look at those people who are willing to share your message. And we are seeing when we've tracked that through the generosity tracker that a lot of people will share messages actually. So it's not that they won't talk about charities, they definitely will. So it's about how can you help maybe your current supporters amplify your message where you can't go and pay for above the line marketing campaigns.
Great. So let's have a look. A question from Candice, who says our data team is always at full capacity. How hard is it to integrate your platform into current systems?
So thanks, Candice. That's a good one. So we have just integrated our first database actually. So this is brand new. We had not built a platform for integration historically, but we now have that. So it did take probably 2 months, but it was reasonably easy. And once we do integrate, then at least you don't need to be going and asking the data team anymore for any data extracts or any help with data because it's hopefully all there ready for you. So even if it's a little bit of pain, depends what platform you've got. Things like Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics are definitely easier. It depends what platform you've got. So there's a couple of different ways that we can solve that depending on your organization.
Great, thank you. And then there's just a question over in the chat from Vanessa who asks, is there a template workflow we can refer to that maps collection of donor data to our system? And then how do we keep the data relevant and updated?
So yes, so one, if you go back to this slide deck, I kind of tried to start writing down all the data points you need to collect around a persona, basically. But one of the things that's really first in our decks is that we actually do look at what is that coverage. We've basically got, for all the key data points, we'll say where you're at, what is the benchmark, and then what is the best in class scenario. So you can and you can filter it. So you can go in there and you can say, all right, for my regular givers, I don't have great coverage of email. And so basically then you've got a little button you can press and it will say, okay, go and collect email or go and collect mobile, etc. So look, there's no easy answers. I talked about guide dogs before. We started working on clean data with them, I think it was 7 years ago, of just like going through, they had low email coverage. And it's like, how do we build this up and and it is just perseverance and it's all the team. Again, knowing what your key data points are, what you need to collect against a supporter profile. And every time there's an interaction, get that next data point. So it's a bit of a slog, but it's really, really important.
Very worth it in the end, by the
Yeah.
sounds of things. Okay, well, I think one question's just, oh no, just a compliment, and there's lots of compliments coming through on the chat as well, Karen. I think everyone really enjoyed that session. We got lots from it, and we're bang on time, coming up to 1 o'clock actually. So there's no more questions. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. For this webinar this afternoon. Thank you to people who put questions forward. As I mentioned, you will get the slides and a recording of this session, so you can go back through it and share it with your colleagues and so on. Karen, thank you so much for taking us through that session today. It was absolutely jam-packed with insights and lots of thought-provoking ideas there. So thank you, Karen. And everyone have a great afternoon. We will be in touch by email over the coming days with those resources. And thanks everyone for being here. And thank you, Karen.
Thanks all.
Take
Cheers.
care. Thanks, everyone. Bye.